Evening, everybody.
Hello.
Sorry?
You're in charge, you tell us.
Welcome to the Jewish Historical Society's 13th Fireside Chat. I think 13 is obviously our lucky number because we've managed to have as our guest this evening the very elusive Dr. Solomon Bard. Just before I introduce him, just a short word about the Jewish Historical Society. Our main brief is to preserve the history of the Jewish community in Hong Kong, most of whose records were lost during the war, and to also to gather information about Jews and their history in both Hong Kong and China. To this end, we have, amongst other things, built up a very impressive Sino-Judaic reference library, which is housed in the library of the Jewish Community Center. And these fireside chats are our attempt to record anecdotes and testimonials of those of our Jewish community whose lives have run in parallel with the remarkable history of Hong Kong. We are truly privileged to have Dr. Bard this evening. He is well known to some of us in the audience, having lived in Hong Kong for many years. But for those who don't know him, I can tell you that he is a most unusual man, a true polymath. He is, amongst other things, a medical doctor, a gifted musician, a conductor of both Chinese and Western orchestras. He volunteered in the defense of Hong Kong. He's an archaeologist, a conservationist, and the list goes on, historian, the list goes on. I'm not sure quite how he managed it, but he managed to find time to get married and even to raise a family. Dr. Bard has now retired in Australia and he visits Hong Kong infrequently. This visit, which is at the invitation of the Hong Kong Chinese Orchestra, happily coincides with the release of his autobiography, Light and Shade, which is hot off the press and is available for sale outside with the monographs of the Jewish Historical Society. Nigel Catt will be interviewing Dr. Bard, and he'll have his work cut out for him trying to cram in this remarkable story in the hour we've allotted him. So, ladies and gentlemen, I give you Dr. Solomon Bard.
Thank you.
So, what would you like me to call you in front of all these people? Dr. Bard, I think.
Very happy to be here.
Okay, we're pleased to have you. You were born on the 13th of June 1916 in Chiba, in Siberia. Chita. And for those of us who don't know, Chita was a small town way over in Siberia. How did your mother's family in particular come to be in Chita, of all places?
Well, to start with, they weren't exiled, though Siberia was a very favorite place for exiles. Regarding the birthday, I was born on my birthday. Not the 13th, but within a year or two, my birthday was shifted. 13 days. I lost 13 days. Maybe I should tell you a little bit about the new Gregorian calendar, which was first adopted in 1573 and was adopted in England about 200 years later. And people were wandering about on the street shouting, "Give us back our 11 days." So I lost 13 days of my life.
But you're now...
So the birthday became 26.
But you're 92. And it hasn't made that much difference in 92 years, has it?
Would you say that aloud?
That's it. And your parents, in fact, you were very careful to say that your parents weren't, your mother's family weren't exiles, but it's right that there was some political exile in there, wasn't there? The Decembrists?
Decembrists were the very early revolutionaries who were exiled to Siberia, and even Chita, the town where I was born. But by the time I was born, they were exiled further up north. In fact, an aunt of mine, the younger sister of my mother, was exiled by the Tsar, and when the revolution succeeded, she was released. We never actually saw her. We weren't allowed. But the Chita, as you said, it was really a boom town at the time. People made money, and it was sort of Wild East instead of Wild West.
Yeah. But there were quite a few Jewish people in Chita, weren't there? There was a Cheder.
Yes.
You went to a Cheder?
I went to a Cheder, but I didn't learn much Hebrew.
No. And your parents had 3 boys,
yes,
of which you were the youngest. So
yes,
your elder brothers were David and Leo.
Leo and myself.
And then yourself. And we've got a picture of both Chita, as it was, a postcard that you kindly brought, up on the left above, behind you, and a picture of you and your brother Leo in typical winter clothes.
That's right, just to show what you wore during winter.
How cold was it?
Down to about 30 degrees centigrade, not unusual.
30
below. Below centigrade.
30 below, so it got cold.
Not always, but it could reach that.
So you had cold winters. Were there roads? Were there paved roads in Chita when you were there?
Not many, no. No sealed roads, 6 inches of sand.
And what about running water? Was there
I think there was.
And gas? And electricity?
My recollection is that there was running water. Even we had a telephone,
You had
which
a
was quite unusual.
Wow.
I've never seen a motor car, but there was a telephone.
You've never seen a motor car. And there's things were how was it for life in Chita in those boom years?
Well, my child was really against the background of quite tumultuous events, revolution, civil war. Civil war.
Civil War.
How can any war be called civil?
Yeah,
But it was.
But by the time you were about 4 or 5, your parents had a nice home. But
Yes.
what happened in 1920?
Yes, they prospered very quickly, and they lost everything very quickly.
So they lost everything in about 1920?
About 1921.
Yes. Now, where did you live when you lost everything? Do you remember?
Well, life still went on. We lost the property, but we weren't ill-treated, and we didn't lose any of our personal possessions. Seemed to be, life went on.
Yes.
Fewer cigars were smoked, less brandy was drunk, but things were not too bad.
Now, your grandparents on your father's side, where were they?
I never met them. I believe they died just about the time I was born, and they remained in Poland.
Right. And on your mother's side?
Well, I knew my grandfather very well.
Yes.
They were in Crimea.
In the Crimea. Some people here may not be familiar with where the Crimea
The
is.
Crimea? Oh, it must be.
Everybody know where the Crimea is?
Crimea Peninsula, now it belongs to Ukraine.
Yeah.
At that time it was Russia. Black Sea, the peninsula on the Black Sea. And at the age of 7 I traveled with my mother on Trans-Siberian Railway to Moscow and then Crimea.
And your
I think the purpose was, I think my mother, by that time, both my parents realized that there was no life in Chita for us, with the Soviets now fully in power, and they were planning to leave. And she decided she would go to Crimea to see her parents, possibly for the last time. It's quite a trip. But strangely enough, 7 days between Chita and Moscow, I don't remember much at all, except that we ran over a cow.
And your grandfather, your maternal grandfather, was quite a man.
Quite a man, yes. He joined the Tsarist army in place of his younger brother. No, sorry, in place of his older brother, who just got married. At that time, these replacements were quite common and legal. You could go and serve in the army instead of your brother. And he thought he just served the normal 4 years. But then last year, the Russia-Turkish War broke out. And then he was marching towards Plevna, a famous siege of Plevna. He was a flautist in the army, but at that time the band marched in front, not behind. There were some extraordinary stories he told me, but I will be digressing. I'm sure Nigel doesn't want to hear the story.
But it's interesting he was a flautist because you heard him, saw him play the flute.
Yeah,
You
he
were
taught me to play
He
flute.
taught you to play flute. Now, he was a good musician. Did he just play?
No, he gave it up. He became a furrier
Yes.
in Sevastopol.
So he was a.
Which was a warm climate. I couldn't understand why he would. He also taught a little music.
Yes.
And that's how my father, who was completely atonal, decided to take lessons to be close to my mother.
That's in order to get close to her before they were married, I guess. And so you went to visit him. And what about your mother's brother, Uncle David? Was he?
Well, that's another story. He managed to get away before the Soviets, before the White Army came to Sebastopol. And eventually ended up in the Middle East playing rather sleazy cafes. He was a violinist, a musician. In Aleppo, Beirut, probably Tel Aviv at that time. And eventually my mother thought that, well, by that time we were in Harbin, that she ought to get her young brother, bachelor, to come join the family. And that's where really my musical career started. There was absolutely no contact with music at all, as far as I remember, until I was 10. My uncle arrived. One day he started practicing his violin. I said, of course, this is what I want to do. It sounds very dramatic, but really it was true.
So that's in Harbin, which is an interesting point because
Oh,
you said that.
yes.
No, it's fine. You said that.
You mentioned my uncle. So.
It's clearly about this time when you were 8 that the family moved to Harbin.
Moved to Harbin when I was 8.
1924. Now Harbin, most of us know and have heard a little bit about the Jews of Harbin, but it was
Anybody from Harbin?
anybody here from Harbin?
I mean, really from Harbin,
No.
not just visiting Harbin.
When your family went to Harbin, was it a Chinese city?
Well, there were parts. There was a Chinese part, and there was a Russian part. The Chinese part was quite small, but there were Chinese people everywhere, of course. It was China, after all.
But
there were a lot of Russians, and a lot of people, both Soviets and the Russian white emigrants, Russians and Russian Jewish.
And were there Germans and others there too?
There were a few, a sprinkle of foreigners, but not many.
So the school you went to
Russian.
was a Russian school, and the streets, the part of town that you lived in, you spent.
Yes, it was a part of town where somehow it's always worked like that. Even in Australia, a lot of Jewish people live in the eastern suburbs. Not so, some live in North Shore, but eastern suburbs is a Jewish place. And so is this, it demonstrates segregation also took place in Harbin, a place called Priston, which means wharf, where most of the Jewish families lived. There was a new town where not so many Jewish families lived. Now I lived, of course, in Priston, where there was Jewish families.
And was Priston a nice area? Was it?
It was very nice, yes, well developed, and beautiful buildings, paved cobblestones, streets, all quite different from each town.
In fact, we can see, again, you've been kind enough
That's
to bring
right.
some pictures. The picture on the left behind us, which is also, all these pictures are in your book, but the one on the left shows us a pretty well a main street in Priston.
Yes, Main Street, which is now a pedestrian mall.
And we can see that there were shops and advertisements and
Shop, advertisements, yes.
all written in,
All in Russian and Chinese.
yes. And so there's a Siemens
There's
shop.
a very rich cultural life developed in Harbin. A symphony orchestra, theatre, very fine schools,
Mhm.
very progressive, liberal,
And
alongside the Soviets, who inherited their half of the China Eastern Railway.
that led to some changes in due course. But I just want to ask you about your youth, your time then.
Yes.
Outside school, what did you do? What apart you learned some music. You went to music school.
Spent a lot of time on the skating rink, ice skating rink, in winter.
In winter and in the summer.
The summers, canoeing in the river, swimming.
Canoeing. So, but that's actually quite interesting because the second picture we have is.
Oh yes, there was a flood in 1932. It was Harbin was particularly our area, Preston, the wharf, was subjected to periodic floods. In my time, I think there was the only one in 1932 where my canoe came very handy. I was doing all the shopping for the family. And I was really quite good at canoeing. And the river was very swift. You had to be really pretty good at managing to keep afloat.
Which is why we can see boats in the main street outside the Hotel Moderne in your picture.
Yes, that's right. Well, it's the same. Yes, it was pretty bad flood. Unlike my brother, I was very fond of sports and swimming. I was not particularly good at it though, except canoeing.
There were a number of youth groups. You mentioned the Soviets. There were other groups as well. What about the Jewish youth groups?
Yes, a youth group was formed, HK, which is a sort of scout group. Pretty harmless, it's very nice, and I joined that. And then over the couple of years, somehow, quite imperceptibly, it turned into a Betar, which was quite nationalist, revisionist group. And I joined that with a brown uniform, learning all about Jabotinsky and Trumpeldor.
So it
was the older boys that somehow managed to transform Hashamer Hatzair, a youth group, into Betar, with Trumpeldor.
A fairly Zionist, strongly Zionist.
It was very popular. It was strongly Zionist, revisionist, not the mainstream. Yeah. And it was very popular with boys like myself because they had a big emphasis on sports. Where I learned to box, and there was running and everything. They were very keen on that. They were really training people to encourage to become Halutzim, to migrate to Palestine.
But there were mainstream Zionists in.
There were mainstream Zionists as well. Yes.
And there was one particularly well-known man who was a doctor.
Dr. Kaufman, a very fine man. A very fine doctor, leader of the community, and an ardent Zionist, but on mainstream Zionism. He's in 1945, right after the war, when the Russians came and the Soviets, the Red Army came. They seized a number of community leaders that they regarded were nationalists, including Dr. Kaufman, and sent them forcibly back to Russia. Many were executed, but he survived in their gulag, and he was there for 10 years. But eventually, Israel had managed to get him out, and he arrived. He came back to Israel, and I met him there afterwards. Very fine man. But
you just ran into him in Israel.
No. Actually, they were decently related to my wife. So we saw them.
Now, 1931-32, the Japanese had come to Manchukuo.
Began to infiltrate. Their idea was to first to destabilize the area. Drugs, kidnapping, mayhem. The Harbin was becoming impossible to live.
And so, what happened to
business was suffering.
Your father's optometrist?
Yes.
So what was...
He began to wind up his business, sold his half, and decided that he'd migrate.
And where did they decide to go?
They decided to go to Argentina because they had relatives there. I decided not to go to Argentina.
But you were 15. What's this? I decided not to go.
I was 16. By that time, I decided that I would not pursue music as a profession.
Oh, but you've been playing in the symphony.
Unfortunately, it was decided I wasn't good enough to be top. And medicine was the next option. And I originally thought I might go to Edinburgh, but financially things were a bit tough. And Hong Kong was near, had a very good medical school. So I said, well, that's fine. I'll try for that.
But Dr. Barr, your language you lived in was Russian. And
I took a cram course in English
where
before I went to Shanghai to an English school. YMCA, about 2 months, I managed to speak a little.
And so with 2 months crash course, you went to
Shanghai.
Shanghai.
Decided I'll try to
Where were your parents?
join the Thomas Hamburg Public School for Boys. The perfect example of a real public school, complete with marching, to the classes, OTC, officers training corps, emulating everything that was best in the public school, completely English.
And where was your parents were then staying behind, waiting for their
Oh, I was
exits?
still in Harbin.
In Harbin.
Yes.
Where was Leo?
Leo came with me to Shanghai to see what the situation was like, and he managed to establish himself in Shanghai afterwards. But he went back,
Yeah.
and for a while I was alone. My uncle was there.
So you were
He was playing in back again to cafe, playing a place called Kafkas, which means Caucasus. A Russian run, a sort of a dining from 8 to 10, and then a cabaret. And while I was waiting to join the school, I had about 2 months nothing to do. My Uncle David said, well, why don't you play a second violin in my band? Make a little money. I was quite good for that. Good enough. And so I did. The dance hostesses were very thrilled. I can't remember about myself. But at 10 o'clock I was pushed away and had to go home.
I think we can see
I
why
wasn't allowed to stay.
I think we can see why the hostesses were rather keen on you, because in the pictures in your book of you at Alan Hambury's is a rather a handsome young man.
Who?
You, tall, reasonably.
Talk about me?
Yes. There's some good pictures here. There's one here of you with your grandpa.
Yes.
In 1931.
Just before my
just before
leaving Harbin.
Yes, but within a year. And then there's a picture of you here in your school hall.
Yes.
The next, again in Harbin in 32.
I must say that this is not an autobiography.
And then, if we look at the sixth form in
It's a
Shanghai,
collection of sketches. And you could say they're autobiographical, but always against the background of various events and people and so on. They're not meant to be an autobiography.
but for those of you that have got a copy, if you turn to picture 3.4, the second from the right is that's your school picture.
Oh yes, that's
This one here,
previous. I did.
and you can
I
see.
loved the British school, the English school, the public school, except the prefix system. I couldn't stand it, and I had a confrontation over that.
Now, you were on your own in Shanghai. Leo came and went, but you were on your own pretty well. And how did you have anybody on whom to fall back?
No, not well. My guardian, yes, I managed to get a guardian.
How did you get a guardian?
Oh, that's a long story.
Can we make it short? Shall I help you make it a bit shorter? Did somebody tell you to go and find somebody?
Well, I arrived with my brother, 6 years older than I, at school, and very naively thought that they would just accept me, because the headmaster said, there's no such thing. You have to have a guardian, either parents or guardian, and respectable citizens, ratepayers of the international settlement. Somebody has to be responsible for you, for your fees, for your behavior, and so on. And so I didn't have anybody like that in Shanghai. And anyway, my brother went back to Harbin. I wrote back to my parents in Harbin and said, well, what am I going to do? And then I had this letter from my mother saying that you can't make it short. Because,
Keep going.
there was a man, an ex-POW, well not ex-POW, was running away during the turmoil in Russia. And also, he was a Czech, actually, and he was trying to get away, going to the east, trying to get on the boat and get back home. But and he was starving, and he was very weak, and she befriended him, gave him money. It was a dangerous thing to do, even though the whole country was in turmoil. And off he went. But then she said, she wrote back to me and said, look, there was this, I had a holiday in Taiwan 3 years ago, and a man came up to me and said, wow, I'm delighted to see you. You're the woman who saved my life. He was that POW. He reached Shanghai, found it was very nice, settled down there. He was a pharmacist, opened a pharmacy and settled down there and remained there. And he said he was prospered, he had a pharmacy, and if he could ever do anything for her, he said, unfortunately, I can't remember his name, nor the name of the pharmacy.
But you had to go and find him.
So I decided I would go and look for pharmacists. and the amusing thing is that the first pharmacy I chose on Bubbling-Well Road, called Regal, I came in and said, could I see the proprietor? And a little potty man came out and said, I'm the proprietor. I said, sir, could I ask you something? Were you in Taiwan 3 years ago? He said, yes. I said, wow. First shot. I said, do you know Mrs. Barr? No, never heard of her. The name was unfamiliar. And I was going away. I was quite angry, actually, a bit upset about that. He said, the man doesn't... And he called me and said, hey, wait a minute, there was another pharmacist in Taiwan. The pharmacists, they know each other. Some are pharmacists. So that's how I found it.
So you went to another
And that
pharmacy?
was right away. Mrs. Marrickson, the wife pharmacist, became my guardian. And there was no problem.
You just walked into another pharmacy and it was the right one?
Called Cathay Pharmacy.
The Cafe. Jewish family?
No, not
Barracks.
Barracks. Czechs.
Czechs.
Yeah.
Amazing story. And within a year, you'd, even though it was a new language, you matriculated, you passed all your exams in the English school in order to get into university.
Even
to
Shakespeare.
Yeah, even Shakespeare.
Wow.
In 1 year. What Shakespeare?
Macbeth.
So you passed your English
Boil,
mathematics
doubles.
the whole thing in 1 year. To the same standard as the kids who've grown up with you. That's a very amazing thing.
It was hard work. I didn't have much time for anything except sports and dictionary.
And that got you into Hong Kong U Medical School. And so you came here in 1934.
That's right.
Queen Mary Hospital wasn't built then.
No.
And the University Medical School worked where?
Oh, St. Paul, very far from here. There was a called government GCH, Government Civil Hospital.
And how were the public health conditions
But
in Hong Kong?
by the time I was a clinical student, that's fourth year. By that time, Queen Mary was just almost ready. So we only had the clinical students. I only had 3 months in St. Paul Hospital, and then we moved on to Queen Mary, which is a beautiful hospital at that time. And it probably still is.
For those of us who are familiar with Conduit Path, who walk along the path at all, there's a lovely picture here of you.
Yes, fortunately, there's still scaffolding around Queen Mary in 1936.
Where there's a picture of you standing on Conduit Path with Queen Mary being built behind you. And again, once, and you were 36, so you were in your 4th year.
Seems like a century ago.
And how you lived, obviously, in and around the university.
In a hospital.
In a
6
hospital.
years.
6 years.
Awful food.
And how was the public health in Hong Kong during that time?
Terrible.
What was
Night soil. Do you know anything about night soil? Well, not in the university.
But everywhere else, or where else?
Well, Sang Pung, the only night soil. If you walked 5 o'clock in the morning in Sang Pung,
Not nice. No?
before night soil was collected.
And what about epidemics?
Oh yes. For medical students, It was paradise. You never learned anything like that anywhere else. Typhoid, meningitis, smallpox, cholera, tuberculosis, you name it. And it's really a good experience.
Well, it was obviously good for you because modesty forbids you from saying it, but I can say it. You won the Anderson Gold Medal for you.
I did. I don't know why. I did all that hard.
You must have studied a bit.
Oh, yes. Yes. Well, maybe it helped that I worked as a fourth-year student. I volunteered to work in a cholera hospital at Kennedy Town at that time. It was pretty awful. It was really awful. We only had 3 weeks vacation at that time. Once you become a clinical student, you don't get 3 months, you only get 3 weeks. And those 3 weeks, the cholera epidemic struck Hong Kong again, many times. And I thought, well, that's a good idea. So I volunteered with a friend of mine, and we went and worked in a cholera hospital, which was pretty dramatic, I must say. But in my final paper, there was a question on cholera. Well, I knew that very well. Maybe that helped.
Maybe it did. War broke out in the West. Hong Kong was a British colony.
Yes.
But war broke out in the West in September 1939.
3rd of September 1939, Britain declared war.
And what did you do?
Went and joined up.
Straight away. Why was that?
I was too young to realize it.
39, I just have to do the subtraction. You were 23. Just. You had your birthday 3 months before.
Just 3 months short of graduating.
3 months short of graduating.
So I had to be a private.
People may not understand that. I didn't understand that. Why were you still... You had to be a private because you hadn't graduated? I don't understand.
Why was I private?
Yeah. And what did that have
I
to
was
do
the
with
doctor,
graduation? Ah. And once you were a doctor...
Once I was qualified, 2 months later, then I was commissioned, full lieutenant.
Full lieutenant. And was this the regular army?
It was volunteer, Hong Kong Volunteer Defense Corps. But the moment the war broke out, it was embodied in the army. Well, same pay, 16 shillings a day.
But you were working in the hospital then?
Yes, I was allowed to continue with internships because the war in the Pacific hasn't started. But as long as I attended regular training, I had to attend all the exercise maneuvers, training, and there was quite a bit of training to do. Even medical officers had to go through all the army training, including weapons.
And this is a picture of you here, of you
Yes,
being commissioned.
Just after commission.
In a pith helmet.
No, this awful pith helmets. In those days, it was considered suicidal to walk around without a pith helmet in summer.
Was it?
Heat stroke, or sunstroke.
But so you signed up.
Complete myth.
You signed up, Russian by upbringing, stateless hitherto.
6 months later, I was British subject.
So you naturalised. So, and that's the summer of 1940.
Yeah.
No war in the Pacific yet?
Not yet.
Now, I think it's a year later that you got married.
Yes. September 41.
Yes. How
I
did you
traveled to Shanghai and being very, very nervous, knowing that at any time, at any day, the Pacific War would start. I was absolutely certain, I don't know about others, but I was quite certain that the war was coming. And I think most people were probably. And we only spent 3 days in Shanghai after wedding, and I was rushed back to Hong Kong. And in fact, I was on just 2.5 months before the war broke out. I was dead absolutely certain that I would have to join my unit, back to my unit. Where all this patriotism came, I don't know.
But my question for you is this. How did you meet Sophie, and where and when?
Oh, she was a medical student. 3 years junior for me.
In Hong Kong?
Yes, Hong Kong.
Right. But she was Russian Jewish too.
Yes.
And the family in Shanghai. So a lot of common.
Oh, very, very similar background, yes.
And was she very much a self-determining woman? How would you describe her character
Oh,
when
yes,
you met
yes.
her?
Oh,
In those
someone you know, Sophie. Yes.
Because Sophie eventually came to Hong Kong, and we'll hear about what she did during the war with you, but she became a very well-known doctor in her own right.
I think
in Hong
so.
Kong.
If I may say
Yes.
so. What do you think?
Yes.
Obs and gynae and
Yes,
yes.
specializing in that.
Now, when you came back, the war broke. The war really took off. But who were you living with? Where were you living when you and
Harry and Sophia Dell. I don't know if many people would remember them. Wonderful couple, wonderful family.
again?
And we had a very nice, comfortable room there.
And
And during the war, Sophie continued to live there while I was in prison camp.
that takes us really to the next episode. If we've got, we're going to have to collapse some stuff. But let's. I think I've failed because I'm more interested in the early stuff and let you go on too much. But in effect, the battle for Hong Kong, you were an army medic. That's
Yes.
there, and you had a unit all of your own.
I was attached to the gunners, to the battery. RA, Royalty, the Royal Regiment of Battery.
And the battery was
Mount Davis.
battery on Mount Davis, which is still
On the third day, I was first at the Populum Reservoir, looking after what they call ADS, Advanced Dressing Station. I was very quiet and comfortable, though there was supposed to be 5th columnists around, so I had to be very careful, organizing sentries and so on, practicing with arms and ammunition and everything, training my people. And then suddenly, on the third day, the Japanese began to bomb Mount Davis.
yes.
And I remember looking at that and saying, oh gosh, I'm glad I'm not there. And I thought, before I finished saying that, I saw a Donar, DR, dispatch rider on a motorcycle, coming up the path with orders from me to go to Mount Davis.
And because
I just jumped on the pillion and said, well, take me over there, right in the middle of shelling.
in the middle of the shelling of the battery.
We arrived safely. And then the rest of the fighting I spent up there, being shelled and bombed.
And treating the injured.
We had some nasty, nasty moments, actually.
Any direct hits?
Sorry?
Any direct hits?
Yes, a very nasty direct hit. We had one anti-aircraft position, right on top of the hill, and that had a direct hit by from the Japanese from the airplane, and I rushed there. I remember it was a frightful sight: 4 dead, 10 wounded. It was horrible. I just had with me some morphia and injected them, stopped bleeding where I could. Still under shelling, still bombs falling around. That just had so much to do that at that moment I just didn't feel anything about it. Nothing mattered. Before that, I was very scared. But when I had something to do, somehow I wasn't. And then got 2 ambulances, little ambulances, got there, and we managed to evacuate them. It was pretty awful.
Yeah. And what about shelling? You talked about
Yes.
shelling. Is there one particular incident?
It
Was the shelling that sticks
almost
in your mind?
continues. Well, I think most people, no, not most people, know that it's now, I think, almost a historical site. We were all pretty safe. We thought we were safe inside concrete bunkers there. But suddenly there was a big crash on Sunday the 14th of December. Huge crash. Boom! Lights went out. There were about 6 of us hiding in that battery plotting room, which is the nerve center of the battery. And the emergency lights were switched on, and there was this big monster, huge shell, 9.5-inch shell, right there, about 5 feet away from me, buried in the ground.
Inside,
Inside. Yes, it goes right through.
through the concrete.
Armor-piercing shell.
And inside these armor-piercing shells is what?
Well, it was kind of hissing, and didn't go off.
Oh, they're full of explosive?
Well, the commanding officer said that we've got to evacuate the fort straight away in small bunches. Because if another shell comes the same way or close by and explodes, this one will explode by sympathetic detonation. I didn't like that word at all. I didn't like that word at all. Well, there was the front door, where it came through actually, through that steel door, was totally impossible to use. But we had a back door. And the battery was evacuated. There were 60 of us inside in bunches of trees. They would run out between shelling. As soon as there's a shell, as soon as there burst, tree would run out over the hill on the other side and out. And I was the last to go with 3 people. The commanding officer said, "You stay to the end in case there are casualties." You know, if it goes off, there wouldn't be casualties. Everybody would be dead. However, it wasn't very pleasant. So once I was out on the other side, it was sunny, it was beautiful afternoon, the shelling was behind, I could hear it. I propped myself against a tree and lit a cigarette, and I was very, very happy.
The battle for Hong Kong was over.
I smoked in those days.
The battle for Hong Kong was over very quickly.
Yeah, 18 days.
18 days, many
Much longer than Singapore.
Yes, yes. But you were, as a uniform, even though you were a doctor, you were a uniformed man, a uniformed officer, and you were interned at Sham Shui Po with all the other officers who were captured.
Yes.
And you spent 3.5 years in Sham Shui Po.
3 years and 8 months,
I'm sorry, 3 years, 8 months. No fun.
to be exact.
Not very pleasant.
No. No.
Tell us a little
Wasn't
bit
a
about
big
it.
deal.
Tell us a little bit
Be a
about
guest of His Majesty Emperor Hirohito.
Yeah. And originally your commanding officer was there, wasn't he?
Yes.
And is that
Commanding officer of the field ambulance, yes. He escaped. He wasn't a clinical doctor. And earlier on, apparently, it wasn't too difficult to escape during the first few weeks. The Japanese didn't quite know how to keep the camp. Colonel Wright,
Lindsay
who
Wright?
became eventually Sir Lindsay Wright,
Yes.
and Vice Chancellor,
Yes. A professor of physiology.
Professor of Physiology.
Uh-huh. And but the conditions in the camp were very, very poor.
Yes, yes. I think it's all relative. I think we were better off than camps further south. In Singapore, Malaya, I think they were worse off. On the other hand, we were not as well as off as north camps in Bhutan. They had people there as well. It all depended on, there were periods that were bad.
Yes.
If you had a good camp commandant, not very tough. The worst thing of all is, if I may say, so the worst thing going to camp, first of all, going to camp was so humiliating. It was probably the most humiliating moment of my life. Were that long line of bedraggled, defeated soldiers. You see that on TV, you know, the marching, Stalingrad and stuff. That's what we were like. Cheering crowds, marching to an uncertain fate. It was terribly humiliating. And then getting in, the Japanese despised us because we surrendered. And getting into camp, having now that your fate was not longer in your hands. The only other comparison is when you're having surgery done, that's your life. But then your life is in the hands of someone who wants to help, who wants to cure you. The Japanese were certainly not that. But anyway, they did keep camps.
But
They did observe that. They had prisoner of war camps. But they despised us, absolutely, for surrendering.
In your book, you talk about, as an example, you talk about the conditions. I think you're being a bit light on
The
them
food
now.
was bad.
But there was disease.
But we did receive parcels from, not Red Cross, no, not until the very end. But Sophie was my wife, got parcels, and all the people, contacts here, in local contacts, received parcels. And I must say that in most cases, to my recollection, the pastors were shared with those who didn't have anybody outside.
Sophie wasn't interned.
No.
She lived still on
Still with
Hong Kong
Adele,
side,
yes.
with the Adeles.
She was married, she was British by marriage. The Japanese didn't bother to intern everyone.
Because she still had her stateless or her Nansen document or a Russian document.
No, she was British.
She was British, but they didn't intern her.
So that's what is known at that time alien pass.
So how did she get from the Odell's in Pok Fulam or in
Harry was interned, but he was a POW
Yeah.
because he was in the Navy, but Sophie stayed on.
How did she get from Pok Fulam or where she was?
She walked.
To Sham Shui Po. She walked.
Yes.
So she walked down to the Star.
Down to the Star Ferry, across, and then walked to Sham Shui Po.
And how? And
I wouldn't have. Quite an achievement.
But she didn't have. I mean, there was no money, was there? Really?
Well, they managed to sell things. So they managed to get a little money from Shanghai now and then.
And with that, they bought.
They just managed to survive.
And they brought.
And bought parcels. And she carried parcels to Stanley as well, to the internment camp. Just marvelous.
Marvelous.
But she quite particularly possibly owe her life. Parcels were very important. They were stopped frequently for long periods, but still, when they were allowed, made a big difference.
Now, you were a doctor. You were interned in a camp where the nutrition wasn't very good. You told us big deficiencies. That resulted in a lot of disease.
Fortunately, I had something to do, and that is very important for morale. We established a hospital in camp, and I was working in the hospital. I tried to get something about music, and when the officers were moved into their own officers' camp, about 20 officers remained with the men in Sham Shui Po. And somehow I feel that just a bunch of officers that running essential services in Sham Shui Po camp, we had better treatment, a little better, slightly more respect, so slightly better accommodation. We still had to salute sentries and so on, but I feel that we were kind of small elite in the camp man. But we were working, we were doing something.
It was a funny elite that lost 40 pounds in weight in the time that you were there. A third of your body weight.
Yes. Well, I mean, we all suffered and lost weight. Malaria, dysentery were quite common.
You had both.
I had both.
Many people had beriberi.
Oh yes, I didn't have beriberi. And there was a frightful thing developed. Nobody quite knew what it was. Some sort of vitamin deficiency. It was called electrical, painful feet. People just got awful, sort of burning electric feet that couldn't walk. And eventually, when it sort of subsided, they had an unsteady gait. What it was, I never received. I don't know why. Perhaps I was too small.
Were there any other Jewish prisoners in the camp? Other Jews? Jewish
Yes,
soldiers?
there was quite a few. No, not a big, but maybe 20 or 30 perhaps. The man, one of our fellow officers, by the name of Rakusin, you remember him, Nat Rakusin, and he conducted services on Shabbat until, no, he wasn't, that's right, no, he wasn't an officer then. So he remained with us in camp.
And he conducted
in
Jewish,
Sham Shui Po.
so you had Shabbat services
Yes.
consistently. Every Shabbat you had services.
Every Shabbat we had service.
So for 3.5 years you went to shul every Saturday?
Prayer books were sent by YMCA. The pastor says that there were American little Hebrew and English little sit-ups.
I want to ask you one more thing about the camp before we go and turn to what happened to you and the family after the war. We're late, but we'll manage. You said there were escapes early.
Yes, there were.
A few later, very rare. But I want to ask you about the barred escape, or the beard escape, that you mentioned in your book. Can you tell us this story? Can I move your microphone? Because I know your cravat keeps bothering you, and every time you touch your cravat, you scratch.
down a bit?
So there we go. Can Can you tell us about the barred escape or the beard escape? Okay. Don't stop.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Fine. Yes. That was a bit of luck. In April 1942, 4 officers escaped. At that time, it wasn't easy to escape anymore. It took a lot of chances. And several of us were helping in the arrangement. And I was playing a harmonium or something. And they were escaped at night, for sure. And I was standing and playing harmonium with a certain tune, so they could hear. When the sentry was near, I played one tune. When the sentry was away, I played another tune. They finally got away, so swimming through Laichikok Bay. Shortly afterwards, the Japanese came in and arrested about 25 people, walked them off from camp. Not me, and not a man called Schiller, who was also involved in helping this escape. George Schiller, Jewish fellow. The men were finally, they got back, except one. One never got back. They were brought back, they had a terrible time, they were tortured, beaten for 1 month, and right at the end they thought they were going to be executed. They were led up to the waterfront, outside camp where usually executions took place. They said, oh, that's the end. Instead, they marched to the camp commandant's house and had a big feast. Unpredictable Japanese. And returned to camp. So I thought, well, I was very lucky, I wasn't taken. No choice. 2 years later, still in camp, a sergeant, totally not from the volunteer regiment at all, comes up to me, I think it was from Service Corps, Royal Army Service Corps, comes up to me and says, you know, my name is Beard. I was taken with that lot and I didn't know what was happening. I think I was taken instead of you.
So he was tortured?
Yes.
He had nothing to do with this?
No. See, you had no idea why he was taken. The Japanese just misread apparently something was left with names, and they said, bar, beard. They took a beard.
They took a beard instead of
And
a
no
bar.
matter what he said to them, they said, well, we've got a man, and that's it. And they also took a man called Silva instead of Schiller. No, another officer.
Tortured?
I might have survived anyway, but I was lucky not to have been among them.
So after...
Poor chap here, I felt terrible about it, obviously, but there's nothing I could do. And he said, no, it's not your fault. It's nothing to do. And I had no idea until 2 years later when he approached me.
That's an amazing story. Solly, we have...
No time?
No, we have some time. And I'd like everybody to give us a little time so we can talk about Hong Kong after the war. Very shortly, as an officer, you were repatriated to England with Sophie.
Yes.
You had a trip to Shanghai on the side.
Yep.
You saw the family, and then you came back and you came to Hong Kong in 1947.
Yes.
Yeah.
How?
And you started medical practice.
I joined practice
With whom?
with Dr. Ramler.
Dr. Rambler.
German Jew. He was a very fine doctor, very fine man.
A German Jewish doctor, so a
He
Russian
wrote to
Jew.
me. He wrote to me in England, inviting me to join the practice. And by that time, money was running out. I wasn't really earning very much. Working in a hospital called St. George in the East, in Wapping, not to be confused with the St. George's Hospital. St. George in the East was heavily bombed. There was only half the hospital left. And I wasn't earning very much, about £360 a year. And so the offer came from Rambler, was very attractive.
And you'd
Even then I hesitated for a long time.
Yeah. Not much demob money left.
No, I had about £200 left. And I finally decided to accept Rambler's offer.
So you came back to Hong Kong. Where did you stay?
we managed to get a room in Peninsula Hotel, which offered us monthly terms. We stayed there for 18 months.
Because you were still because you were demobbed, but you were an officer as well as a medic.
No, I was demobilized in England. I was no longer officer.
So this was terms available to anybody?
I was demobilized for another, almost a year in uniform before I was demobilized in Guildford.
And Sophie came back, having qualified.
Yes, she stayed behind to qualify. I came first, and then she just managed to qualify, didn't take any internships in London, came straight back, and she was already pregnant.
Pregnant with Monica, who was born in '48. Now, you obviously can't live in a hotel forever.
No, I'm very grateful to future Lord Kaduri,
Lawrence Kaduri,
who took pity on a young Jewish doctor without a flat, who couldn't afford to pay key money. He said, well, I was introduced to him by a mutual friend named Alex Polak. He said to do something for a young Jewish doctor. And Kaduri very kindly lent us a flat, St. George's Mansions, without any key money.
And
beautiful flat.
And you stayed there for a little while?
Oh, until I joined the university.
Well, you joined the university
until 1956.
7 years.
Yeah.
So that
was 6 or 7 years.
6 or 7 years you lived in St. George's Mansions. The kids were born while you lived in St. George's Mansions.
Yes.
And they went to KG5.
Eventually, yes, KG5.
Yeah. They went to Glen Ely first. And Glen Ely.
Glen Ely first, then KG5.
Now, you didn't just start with medicine. You are a man who can't sit still, if you'll forgive me saying so.
How do you mean?
Well, you didn't just do medicine. What else did you do in the late 40s, early 50s? Just give us a list of 4.
Fencing.
Yes.
Still continued with volunteers.
Yes.
Rejoined. They have reformed. Archaeology.
Archaeology. More in the 50s. Tell me about the music.
Well, music as well. I very often was described as the founder of the Sino-British Orchestra, or the Hong Kong Philharmonic. I was not. When I arrived here from London in the autumn of 1947, the Sino-British Club had already started, and the music group of the Sino-British Club had already started an orchestra. They already had 3 rehearsals before I was asked to join. I'm not a founder.
But you were almost. But it didn't take long for you to be the leader of the orchestra.
Yeah, they asked me to be the leader, the concert master. It was a small orchestra, not very good. And they had a bandmaster from one of the serving regiments here, conducting. He wasn't very good at it, but the main thing is that he was usually came to rehearsal inebriated. And when he fell off the podium, that was it. And he said, we'd better have Solly on the podium instead.
And that orchestra, in due course, became the Hong Kong Phil. Is that right?
That's right.
And you stayed a member of the Hong Kong Phil and a leader and concertmaster for how long?
Oh, something like 15 years.
Something like that.
Until it became professional.
Yes. Now, you joined Hong Kong U in 1956, not to practice as a doctor.
Not what?
Not just to be a university doctor.
Oh, yes, mainly. But there were some lectures as well.
But you did something better than, something bigger than just being
It was a very interesting job in the sense that I was really commissioned to establish a new service, student service. Until then it was very part-time. And it was very challenging. I had no idea what it implies. And when the university invited me to take up this job, I took leave from Rambler, went to England, to find out what the student health service really does for students. Not just health service, not just clinic, but more than that, a wide-ranging facilities for students, including sports medicine, psychological, health education, preventive medicine, a whole range of activities, which I thought I must know something about it. That the England was really well at the forefront of that. Visited several very good. University of London was very much involved in that, pioneering health service, and by the time I came back, I knew what I wanted to do.
And you set up a mini
Set
health
up,
service.
yes. University didn't know much about it, but by that time I knew what I wanted to do. A comprehensive service for students, staff, completely free of charge.
And it was very successful. It just grew from there.
Yes.
And
It's still thriving. It's still very good service, I think.
you lived on the university campus. We've got a picture of what the university was like in the 30s, but was it roughly like that in the 50s too? This picture at the top.
Yes, more or less. Yes.
That was the main part of Hong Kong.
That was the main part, from leading from Bottom Road.
And you lived in a house behind.
There were still houses, the university, yes.
And how was
The
it?
university passed from 1 to 7, and the lodge was not where it is now. The Vice-Chancellor's lodge was in the actual main compound. There were no buildings inside, just nice vegetation, garden.
3 kids, young kids.
Yes.
And so, what did what happened on the weekends and in the evenings with the family? What did the family get up to? What was it like in Hong Kong in the 50s?
Jewish club, 3 nights a week. JRC.
Really?
Yes.
You too?
That was really, that time we really spent time at the Jewish club.
Uh-huh.
Almost weekly, three nights a week. Wednesday, Saturday and Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
Playing tennis, badminton, bridge.
Bridge. You liked to play bridge.
I did at that time, yes.
Who was your main partner?
Oh, well, yes, a man called Godkin, somebody remember? Bob Godkin.
Right. Charlotte.
Yes, unfortunately, went to Israel on a visit and collapsed and died.
It's a shame.
I lost a partner, and I think I stopped playing after that. I never partnered with my wife. That was a recipe for disaster.
Now, I just want to ask you something in 1953, and then we'll broaden the picture to the 60s and travel and the music again, but and archaeology very quickly, if I can. 1953, you talked to me this morning a little bit, and I asked you what it was like in the summer in Hong Kong in the early 50s, and you said to me, it was hot. I said, yes, and humid.
Yes. I still was not particularly healthy at that, but was coming up. Air conditioners just beginning at that time. I think I had my first air conditioner in 1953. It was becoming more comfortable, but in university houses were big colonial ones, and they were really very comfortable, and they were cool in summer, and they were warm in, well, they were cold in winter.
But air conditioning changed things.
Yes. Well, one of the great inventions, I think.
So, you travelled widely. I mean, the university had long leaves, right? And you had to go, and they paid for you to take
That's right.
home leaves. So, what happened with you and Sophie and the kids over those 20 years of Hong Kong music?
Sophie didn't like to go away for too long, because she always wanted to practice on her own. She had her own practice, she never wanted to be in partnership. And we took turns looking after children.
Mm-hmm.
Animals, of course, but that's not the same thing. She'd like to go to Japan, where she had close friends and citrons.
Mm-hmm.
She liked to go to Japan, but I used to go somewhere else. And, wherever there was very interesting things to be done.
Either with the health service.
And of course, my
or
parents were in
archaeology.
Argentina,
Yes.
so I'd like to go there.
Where was Sophie's family?
They came in around about early 50s, came to Australia. And so that's another place where Sophie wanted to go, of course.
And you weren't particularly interested?
Once the boys were sent to Australia, and I also went there.
So the boys went to school in Australia,
Yes.
and Monica, where did Monica go?
Monica continued until she finished school in KG5.
And let's just wrap up what's happened with the kids now, because we're getting close to closing. Monica lives now where?
She's now in England.
In England. What does she has a profession?
Psychotherapist.
Married?
Yes, married, one child.
Called?
Antonia.
One grandchild there. Paul?
Paul is in Australia, solicitor, with 4 children.
And you
from
actually...
2 marriages.
From 2 marriages, and you actually live on
Yeah.
campus there.
We share a house.
Sophie passed away in
2.5 years ago.
2.5 years ago after a long and unfortunate struggle with Alzheimer's.
Very long and very distressing illness.
And you went in fact you went to Australia, you retired to Australia in 93.
93.
93, having finished with the University Health Service.
Oh, long ago.
Then you were a very senior man in archaeology in Hong Kong. Your job was what was the official title, sir?
When I retired from the university in 1976, I was very lucky to be just the right place, the right time, when government decided to set up the Antiquities Office. And I happened to be there, and they said, you're the man to run it. I wasn't so sure. They said, I'll have a go. And for 8 years, I became a civil servant. Not very civil, but servant. And it was a very challenging job. I went back to England to find out what it entails, heritage conservation. Government didn't really have much of an idea. There was no job description of any sort. I had 2 attachments, were very useful. And I enjoyed immensely my work in heritage preservation. At that time, it was really beginning, and now so much has been preserved or lost. But at that time, it was all new, and I couldn't have wished for a better job, particularly for someone who wanted to be an archaeologist. However, the point is that I got the job because of my archaeological experience. When I got the job, I found out that there was more history, local history, than archaeology. And I wasn't really a historian at that time at all. So I had to learn about local history.
So 8 years you headed the Antiquities and Monuments Office, 1976 to 1983. And I think we can see at the Hong Kong Museum of Coastal Defence today, there's a storyline.
The storyline, yes, is essentially mine, yes.
Yes, and a lot of the facilities that have been set up by government.
The conceptual design that I produced for Museum of Coastal Defences was not accepted.
But a
They
number
decided to do it differently. And it is a very fine museum, just to say, very fine museum.
And after the Hong Kong Museum of, after the AMO, you still didn't take it easy. I mean, in 1983 you were 77, but you took another job.
Yes.
At 77. What was that?
When I finished with the AMO,
Yes.
Antiques and Monuments, again I was in the right place at the right time. The assistant music director of the Chinese Orchestra, Hong Kong Chinese Orchestra, resigned. And they said, well, would you like to apply for that job? And again I said, what, me? I need some time to prepare for it. Now, and then again, another challenge, and I thought it was great. I'll have a go.
But you've been playing and conducting
That was
Chinese
full
music
time
for 20 years.
And it was very, very tough. It's 30 hours a week, 6 hours a day rehearsals, and the scores were all in Chinese. I had no time for archaeology at that time. It was very, very busy time. But again, it was very interesting, rewarding, challenging. And as you can see, on Friday I'll be conducting Chinese orchestra, and Saturday.
Friday and Saturday at the City Hall,
That
which
was-
you helped force them to build, which you helped lobby for the building of City Hall
Yes.
back in the 60s, so in the 50s. So you'll be playing with your orchestra in
Again,
your hall.
it wasn't me personally. committee was formed, the city hall, the first city hall, it was an outrageous business. It was demolished in 1930s. It was built by public subscription. It was demolished by the government. The land sold to Hong Kong Shanghai Bank so that they could expand. And no protest at all, no public protest at all. That's why everybody was waiting for the war to break out, and nothing was done about it. The city, Hong Kong, lost the city hall, the heart of the city. And it was a very fine building with very fine facilities, the museum, the library, and all sorts of things.
Good
But
picture.
in the 1950s, we began to sign a British club and say, look, we ought to get a city hall. The government was not going to do anything about it. And so a committee was formed by the Sino-British Club. I had quite a bit to do with it. I was a member of the committee. And we thought it was going to be a very tough thing. How are we going to get government to build the city hall? It will cost a lot of money. And brought a letter to the government. Finally, we demand that you give us back the city hall. And lo and behold, the government said, yes, we'll do it. Well, that was a surprise.
But I think we scratched the surface, see. You said, yeah, we did. You said you didn't think that you'd go for 45 minutes. You've gone for, what, 75?
No.
Yes.
Well, it's time for questions.
I think so. If you're willing to take some, I know everybody.
Oh, why not?
Everybody's bursting.
HK always gets the first question.
It's in the rules.
I've known you for half a century.
You know everything. Why are you asking?
For the benefit of the younger people like you. About the escape from the camps. One person who's not known to many of the people here, who eventually was knighted, Sir Selwyn Clark, Director of Medical and Health Service, before the war and during the war. He was not interned initially. And then he was allowed to look after the prison war and the civilian population in general by the Japanese in fact. Initially he was treated quite well. But when Lindsay Wright and the 3 others escaped, he was dead against it. Was it true? And he had a serious disagreement with Lindsay Wright over the escape. He said when people escape, Japanese will take reprisals against the rest. Is it true?
I don't know. You may be confusing. The 4 officers who escaped in April.
Yes. No, earlier.
Yes, he escaped much earlier,
Yeah.
within the first 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And we had a meeting with all medical officers. He was the actually commanding officer of the field ambulance. And he told us, look, as British officers, you're bound to try to escape. I'm useless here. I'm a professor of physiology. I never practiced medicine. I don't know anything about clinical medicine. I'm going to try to escape and tell people what the conditions here are. I'm not going to tell you not to escape, because this is something that every British officer has to do, or has to try to escape. But I will tell you one thing, that you will be needed very badly in camp. There will be a lot of sickness, I can tell that, and you will be badly needed. That's all I can tell you. And that I remember very distinctly. 1 or 2 did escape. Dr. Scriven, you may remember. Yes. Oh, well, he was the doctor. Oh, yes, people did escape. Dr. Escape.
Goodwin.
Dr. Scriven did escape once, perhaps. But I wasn't going to try anyway, because first of all, Sophie was in Hong Kong. The first thing they would have done, if they discovered the escape, would have gone and got at Sophie and my wife, and they wouldn't have believed that she had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
So it wasn't very safe. In any case, I don't think I contemplated an escape.
Have you got another question?
Tim,
I'm going to short stop this. How did you get from the Crimea to Harbin?
sorry?
It is switched on. How did you get from the Crimea to Harbin?
How did I get?
Yes.
I never lived in Crimea, I only visited.
Right.
Yes.
When you went to
From
visit.
Chita,
Okay.
by train.
Okay.
No, we still allowed, we had exit visas. We're allowed legally, but only just. The Soviets were clamping down on any immigration, and we were very lucky to get out. Well, by that time, my father had already left with my brother Leo, and my mother and I were living in a boarding house where most people were waiting for visas and not getting them. And mother was going daily to some sort of office and harassing them to get a visa. Nobody said, you won't get it, you won't get it, you'll be stuck here. And I remember one morning, she was coming back, waving a paper, we've got the visas. That was 1924.
And that was for a holiday trip. That was to go to Moscow and the Crimea.
Oh, no,
the exit visas.
That was to go to Harbin.
So that's the Harbin exit.
Yes. And we left.
I think Judy wants to
Well,
ask
yeah.
a question.
But after that, it was becoming more and more difficult. People had crossed over the border, illegally.
Sing out
Judy.
of the microphone. In Emily Hahn's book, China to Me, she talks about staying with Sophie Odell's parents, the Wheels,
That's right.
in Fulham. Is that where Sophie was as well?
Yes. Yes. I still remember Mrs. Will quite well.
Rosie.
From before there was Rosie. Yes. That's where the Albert Rose comes from. Rosie's husband was Albert.
Yeah.
Ah, Albert
And they
Rose
had,
is
they
still
had
there.
the first Senef Frère, the jewelry shop.
For anybody who doesn't know, if you
The
go
university
along,
eventually bought Albert Rose. From
Yeah.
Albert and Rose.
if you go along Fulham Road, you can see Albert Rose just opposite Woodbury Court on the
Is it still
hill.
there?
Yes,
Yeah.
old Albert Rose is still there. It's University
Yeah.
Housing, 4 flats, and there's a short 6-story block behind it
Yeah.
called New.
Rosie Wheel was a real matriarch. She kept everybody like that.
Can I just point out, if you walk up Fulham Reservoir Road from the bottom by the riding school to the peak, you can see Solly's old field station on the right. It's bricked up. You can see
concrete bunker, yes.
the concrete bunker, which was his field station, where they picked him up on the motorbike and took him off to go and work at the Battery of the Mount Davis. Is there another question?
I mean, being an authorized in Hong Kong, did you think about leaving the city when the Communist Party took over China? Or 1967 riots?
1967 riots, yes.
So at that time, did you think about leaving Hong Kong for other places?
We were mobilized. The regiment was mobilized.
The volunteers.
Yes.
You were a senior officer in the
Yes.
Hong Kong volunteers.
That's right.
And when you were mobilised, can you
We were
explain
mobilized
what
for
that meant?
1 week.
In 67.
That even though I was still working for the university, they had to let me go. Because that was an emergency. It was a very unpleasant time. And, the streets were curfew, the streets were empty. We had to wear steel helmets because people were throwing things from verandas and windows. We were driving around, but nothing much happened. As far as I was concerned, I didn't have to treat any casualties. But shortly afterwards, we had some terrible floods and storms, and building collapsed. And again, volunteers were mobilized to help dig out people.
So Hong Kong was you were asked whether, as a British person or a naturalised Brit, you felt like leaving. What did you feel like when the riots broke out?
Well, I don't know. I really don't know that I felt that it wasn't the first time that there was
Yeah.
trouble with animosity. In the 1950s, the relations between China and Hong Kong and Britain were almost non-existent.
But no thoughts.
I always had a certain amount of sympathy for communist China, and incurred quite a bit of censorship and wrath when part of us in Sino-British Club, the music group, in 1956, when the relations were very bad, decided to accept invitation from Canton to go to Canton and perform there. And the newspapers were very unkind to us.
Well, you had to have permission to go from the university.
I had to have a permission from the Vice Chancellor, which was Sir Lindsay Wright, and he wasn't very happy at all. He said, you know what you're doing? I said, what? They're going to make propaganda out of your visit there. You know what communists are like? I said, have I your permission to go? Yes, you have my permission to go. I can't tell you not to go. I said, well, then thank you very much. I will go. and next year we went again.
And there's
that next time it was with Percy Chan, who was a local solicitor, but very left, was very friendly with communist China. But in point of fact, our visit during Easter holidays to Canton, there was absolutely no propaganda. They made no use of our visit at all. They were very cordial, polite, friendly, wonderful hosts, with lots of good food. We performed in a huge 5,000 Sun Yat-sen Memorial Hall. I performed the play very badly.
What did you play, son?
We couldn't get the Sino-British Orchestra to go there because all sorts of people. If you work for an American firm or even a British firm, they say, no, you're not going. If you work for a government, you're not going. So only those of us who weren't working for American firms and so on were, so in the end, only about 8 of us musicians were able to go. And so we performed a quartet, string quartet. And I played a sonata with Harry Ore, which is a well-known pianist at that time. And Barbara Fay, that lovely person. What happened to Barbara? She sang, and during an interval, and when Barbara Fay sang, I went to the back. 5,000 people, and this was not an audience that was made to come. They were real, genuine audience, and they were really enthusiastic. They felt that there was something happening between the East and the West, between China and the West. We were pioneers in that. Of course, nothing happened in the end. It all petered out.
And that was 1956.
56 and 57.
And 57. And when did you last see Barbara Fay?
2 years ago. She was, when I was conducting Chinese orchestra, she was a presenter. It's just as glamorous as ever.
Thanks very much.
Among your group, there was one civil servant who went. Dr. Wong was a civil servant.
Who?
Dr. Wong Cheng-kyun.
Wong Cheng-kyun, yes.
He was a civil
He
servant.
took quite a chance.
That's
He
right.
was a doctor working for the government, that's right. Tung Wah Tung,
That's right. Yes.
a wonderful flautist.
That's amazing. So you're a flautist, I think a violinist, an archaeologist, a doctor, a writer, historian. This memoir is the 5th or 6th book, sorry.
Let's say I believe that if the thing is worth doing, it's worth doing badly.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you'll join me in saying thank you. Thanks very much for coming. And I think Judy wants to say a couple of words.
No, I just wanted to say thank you. We're really honoured.
We
We're
are.
so pleased we managed to get you at long last.
Congratulations,
So,
Judy.
thank you. No, it was Nigel. Actually, Nigel was
well
persistent.
Judy. Thank you very much. Thank you. It was wonderful.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes, thanks ever so much. And keep your eye out for the next JHS event. If you haven't got a copy of Solly's book, I think there may still be a couple outside, but also do have a look at our other publications because they're all worth having. Thanks very much for coming. Good night.
Certainly worth coming. There was more stories. I'm very glad I came to both. The sun's running.
I have to congratulate you. Very much.
So sorry. That's okay. That's okay.
Oh, I just want to give him a kiss, may I? Congratulations, darling. It was really wonderful. Wonderful. God bless you. I'm going to follow. I'm so glad I did it beforehand. He went, no. I said, yes.
People don't realize during the time when he visited China, the relation between UK and China was quite important. Brooke Kelton, Peter Townsend, Princess Margaret was went on song. And he wrote 2 or 3 months of closed down. They came to different periods and now went back in 62 years.
Thomas Hammer School for Girls. Yes.
The border was quite open until it was closed at 52. Before people could allow